Hello and welcome to the program Energy Day Timelines on Energy Day TV. My name still remains Monique Aigbe. I'm so glad to be here today and we have a bumper package for you. I hope you've been enjoying all the great interviews we've brought your way so far on the program. If you are joining us for the very first time, the program Energy Day Timelines is all about updating you and informing you about the happenings in the energy sector. Today on the program, we will be talking to the head of the Power Sector Group, the Lagos Chambers Commerce and Industry, that is the LCCI, by the name Otunba Akimbo. Otunba Akimbo happens to be the co-founder of Kawai Technologies and a multidisciplinary logistics, engineering and procurement company that works across Nigeria. Otunba Akimbo Akin Olugbade is also a member of the Nigeria Society of Engineers. Stay with us as we speak to him.
I'm Akimbo Akin Olugbade. I'm the Managing Director of Kawai Technologies. We're a supply chain management company. We work typically with infrastructure companies in Nigeria and West Africa.
How would you assess investment efforts under the present administration in the power sector within the last 7 years?
Well, everyone looks at the final product, which is whether or not we have power for our homes, our offices, and from a consumer point of view, we feel like the government's not working. But I think that doesn't tell the whole story. There are a lot of developments in the background and there are a lot of advancements that the government has made over the last 7-8 years in terms of providing funds and investments to the power sector. Of course, starting with the privatization program in 2013-2014. So a few that I'd like to highlight for you, 213 billion naira in 2014 from the Nigerian Electricity Market Stabilization Facility. This was for settling outstanding obligations to market participants, service providers, gas suppliers, and legacy gas debts of the PHCN. The objective here was simple, and it was to put the Nigerian electricity supply industry onto a route to viability and sustainability. More recently, in 2017, there was the 701 billion naira power assurance guarantee for the bulk electricity trader, NBET. This provided by the central bank, and it was to guarantee payments for the evacuation of power produced by the GENCOs. The objective of this was to assist in resolving over 500 billion naira of debts which had accrued to gas suppliers over the years. More recently than that was 140 billion naira in 2020, the solar connection facility, which I'm sure you're aware of. This was a part of the support to economic recovery in response to the COVID-19, and the plan was to roll out 5 million new solar-based connections in off-grid communities. Additionally was to give access to 25 million individuals through 5 million connections, as I just mentioned, and solar home connection facilities and mini-grids. The idea here is very simple. Provide affordable, low-cost electricity to the furthest reaches of our country, to areas where the grid either is insufficient or is not getting there fully. 2019, there's the Siemens power plan, which a lot of us have seen. This is $2.3 billion in totality. However, this is slightly different from the others in that this is not money the government has put forward. This is a plan, and there are parts of it that we need to address. But if going by the plan, if we're able to implement the plan, we're looking at a phase 1, 7,000 megawatts from optimization of existing assets. Phase 2 is an additional 11,000 megawatts on top of that. And then the last phase will be 25,000 megawatts, upgrading expansion facilities throughout the grid. The last thing that I want to talk about briefly is the mass metering program. And I think this is what viewers and the consumers, they can interface with. It's meters in every home. Right now, the vast majority of metering is still estimated. Billing is estimated. And the government has put forward last year 210 billion naira for the national mass metering objectives. And this is to increase the metering rate, elimination of arbitrary estimated billing, strengthening our local meter value chain by increasing meter production here locally in Nigeria. And this is also to reduce collection losses in the system, and improve our network monitoring capacity. So yeah, I think that touches on that.
The federal government has concluded plans to generate 30,000 megawatts of electricity by 2030, with 3,000 megawatts from renewables and 27,000 megawatts from its power plants to serve its over 200 million people. With all these numbers, how do you intend to achieve all this?
The progress is, for me, it's about measurable improvements over time, right? And yes, we set goals, and if we reach those goals, that's great. But if we are making progress towards reaching those goals, I think we deserve the credit that's due in such instances. So I mentioned a few minutes ago about the grid supply increases. We've seen about a 1,000 megawatt increase in the last 7 years. This translates to about a 14% increase in the grid wheel capacity. That's significant. That's not nothing. That's an additional 1,000 megawatts into the grid every single day throughout the country. In 2022, our peak operational capacity has increased to 5,800 megawatts. This is significant. That's the maximum we've ever achieved. But on average, we're doing about 1,000 megawatts more than we were doing before. But as you can see, it does mean that the targets that we set for ourselves, they're a bit beyond what we can manage. And I think the 30,000 megawatt target is, let's be frankly realistic, is not achievable by 2030. However, if we can unlock our entire installed grid capacity, which stands currently at 13,000 megawatts, that's almost tripling our current capacity, our current generation capacity, our distributed grid capacity. So we were at 4,500 megawatts. We now are at 5,800 megawatts, and the potential exists because our installed capacity is about 13,000 megawatts. The potential exists right now to achieve that. So I think if we make investments with a goal to achieving those 13,000 megawatts, that will be a huge difference. It's almost tripling what we have right now in the system. On the renewables, in Q2 of 2021, hydro plants, renewables and hydro plants, in power generation, when we talk about renewables, we're usually talking about hydro plants. So Kainji, Jeba, Shiroro, and those kinds. But they produced about 18% of our total grid energy. The completion of the Mambilla hydropower project, which is a little over 3,000 megawatts, that's also come on stream. And these targets are achievable. We can hit this 13,000 megawatts if we put in more effort into optimizing these installed generation capacity assets. There's also a lot of funding into energy access generally. The World Bank has grants that Nigeria has been taking advantage of. Companies have been investing in the sector. We've all heard of All-On Power and companies of that nature. The Bank of Industry has funding for mini grids and solar energy companies. There are a lot of GIZ, the German Institute, they're doing a lot of partnerships. Daystar Power has been operating here. There was a facility we inaugurated a few weeks ago, UAC Dairies, for instance. You have a lot of companies, investing heavily in solar renewable power.
The country's power generation still hovers just above 5,000 megawatts, despite the 13,000 megawatts installed capacity 8 years after the sector was privatized. Is this an evidence of failure of the 2013 privatization exercise?
So the quick answer to that is no. It does not show the privatization to be a failure. I mean, I alluded to earlier that the grid electricity has gone up by 14%. We're now at 5,007 or 5,008 megawatts of electricity on any given day. The privatization process of NEPA produced 18 successor companies, 6 GENCOs, 11 DISCOs, and 1 transmission company, which still remains in government hands. So if you say a failure of 3 of those companies out of 18, I mean, I wouldn't call that a failure. Secondly, the other way you should look at it is in the private sector, companies that cannot be run well will fail. They are supposed to fail. That's how the free market works. And what will happen is that you will get a better company that can do it better, that comes out of the ashes of the last company. So for me, that 3 companies have failed so far, for me is a good sign, in that it says, okay, there are efficiencies that can still be had, and other companies will come in to make those efficiency plays. So we want to see more mergers, more companies being taken over, more competition within the sector amongst the discos and the gencos, and that can only be a good sign for the consumer at the end of the day.
So gas accounts for about 81.53% of electricity generated in 2020-2021. Why is gas supply a major issue for the power sector, despite the country's largest gas reserves?
Well, one thing a lot of Nigerians may not be aware of is that Nigeria is a gas country. We're not an oil country. And the government has been quite decent, actually, in terms of gas investments. Nigeria LNG is probably our biggest success story. Off the top of my head, I think they're on train 8. These are the industrial capacity plants for producing the gas. And these are multi-$100 million investments each train, and it's profitable. So we have gas. That's not the issue. And why are we having problems getting gas to industry and to generation companies on a consistent basis? The biggest problem there is pipelines. It's an infrastructure problem. So we've got the gas in the ground, but we don't have the gas network going through the system. If you look at Russia has something called Novorossiysk, which is their gas pipeline network, or rather one of their gas pipeline networks, and it goes everywhere. It goes through Siberia, it goes literally everywhere. So it doesn't matter where you are in Russia, it doesn't matter what facility you want to start, whether it's nickel processing, whether it's a tin mine, whatever it is, there's going to be a gas pipeline close to you that you can interconnect with. In Nigeria, it's totally different. The gas pipelines are almost built in colonial mindset ways. To understand what I mean is, in colonial times, every major producing town had a railroad which connected straight to the port, so that the raw materials which were taken out could be taken straight and shipped abroad, full stop. There was no interest in whether those raw materials might be usable within the country. And we're seeing the same thing with gas. Gas is produced and it's sent straight to where we can offload it and send it out. We're not thinking, or rather we're just starting to think about, how do we get this gas across the country to every single point that it might be required. How do we get it to Kano? How do we get it to Ogun? How do we get it to Onitsha, Aba, Enugu, Lagos, and all the other towns within those cities where you have manufacturing hubs, industrial hubs, and also gencos that rely on gas supply. So gas pipeline is a major issue that we're seeing. Secondly is gas agreements. It's one thing to have your pipelines in place. It's totally another to have agreements in place. Gas is a bit different from crude, in that crude tends to be, yes, you can have long-term crude contracts, but a lot of crude is also traded on the spot market, which means you make an agreement for X quantity today or at some point in the future, and you'll deliver that quantity at a certain price. Gas, because of the level of investment required to capture the gas and then to compress the gas and then deliver the gas along the pipelines, you need to have very long-term gas pipeline agreements in place. We're talking in the order of 20-year agreements. And in Nigeria, we're a very short-term economy. So it's much harder here to have 20-year agreements in place that people will actually follow through on. So I think those two things together are part of the reasons why, even though we're a gas country and gas accounts for 81% plus of our electricity, we still have problems with the gas supply.
There are plans to increase the electricity tariff this year, 2022. Will the much touted service-based tariff regime solve liquidity issues affecting the sector?
So, again, it's funny, I like to address these points both from a consumer side, because I'm a consumer as well, but also as an investor. I've invested in power projects and power companies. And so I also understand what the requirements are in terms of funding and financing. And it's instructive that there's a huge mismatch between both. I'd like to answer that question by comparing Nigeria and power investments to a country like the United Kingdom, which a lot of us are familiar with. The average per kilowatt hour price we're paying here in Nigeria is 53 naira per kilowatt hour. And I checked recently, and in the UK, they're paying roughly 3 times what we are paying in Nigeria, which is, from our perspective, is exorbitantly expensive. But one thing you have to understand is that the requirements in terms of capital investment are the same. The power plants that you need to generate that power, it's the same producers making them. So we have to make the same investments to generate that power and transmit that power, distribute that power, and get it to the end consumer. But if you consider that Nigeria, the average Nigerian is paying a third at the downstream side, this is at your house, your per kilowatt hour price at your home, you're paying a third of what they're paying abroad. And if you read the news, you'll find that the companies, their discos, they're failing all the time. You know, a couple closed down in London in 2021, which means at 3 times the per kilowatt hour price, they're still not able to make it work entirely. I mean, fine, yes, they have constant 24/7 power and things like that. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is an industry that requires huge levels of investment. Huge, absolutely astronomical levels of investment. And I can understand why the MITO tariff was put in place. And I understand the escalations in the tariff to try and reach those funding levels that these companies, both our discos, our gencos, and even the transmission company, which still remains in government hands, needs to invest in this infrastructure. So the money is required. So from an investment point of view, yes, it will help, it will go some way to solving the liquidity issues. But as a consumer, I disagree. So I'm giving you 2 points of view from the same person. As a consumer, it's becoming increasingly unaffordable. And as a consumer, we don't care what anyone is paying anywhere else in the world. We're here in Nigeria, and we know how difficult it is to make a 1 naira at the end of the month. So at the current pricing and at the current price escalations, it's becoming increasingly unaffordable for the average Nigerian to afford power. It's becoming increasingly unaffordable for the average company or manufacturing company in Nigeria to afford power. And what's going to happen, and you're already seeing it happen, is as these power tariffs keep increasing, more companies are going to switch to renewable sources. And there are a lot of companies doing long-term power purchasing agreements for renewables, which means you're not going to put any more money down. I was speaking with a hotel developer just about 2 hours ago this morning, and they're doing an 80-room hotel near the new port in the free trade zone. And they're exploring exactly this option. Their facility is being put up, and they want to put in a power solar supply agreement with 25-year power, no money down. No money down. They're just going to pay per kilowatt hour on a take-or-pay agreement. And there's so many companies doing this now. So the government needs to look at balancing. Yes, we understand why the MITO was put in place, but we also have to understand the purchasing power of the Nigerian. It's increasingly unaffordable, and more people are going to switch to renewable, which is great for our environment, but it's terrible for our power companies because it means they're going to have fewer and fewer customers, which is going to drive the price further up for the remaining customers, which will force more customers out of the market.
Infrastructure deficit has been a major issue affecting the sector across all the entire value chain, especially on the distribution side. So what are the quick fixes to this?
The major problem that as I see it with our power sector is losses. It's losses due to the type of infrastructure we have and the way we maintain our infrastructure. I remember seeing a study, this is probably 10 to 12 years ago, and at the time the average losses for power within Nigeria was about within Africa was about 11% losses within Africa. Nigeria, though, and we're talking over a decade ago, Nigeria was at 33% losses, system losses. Now, cut to present day, we're looking at losses which are, well over 45%. So we've gotten worse over time. We've actually gotten worse over time in terms of losses in the system. So that means for every 100 naira of power that's generated, only 45 naira, only 55 naira is getting to the consumers. We've lost almost half of it along the value chain, from poor wiring, derelict infrastructure, tapping of the network. They're just myriad of losses along the way. And that's why I said, I think the first thing we need to see is how do we achieve our 13,000 megawatt installed capacity with what we have. And that means let's invest in upgrading our infrastructure, renewing our power lines, renewing our substations. The transmission company, honestly, I have no idea why that was left in government hands. I mean, I'm sure many people are still confused about that. And it's one of the reasons the system can't progress. That should have been privatized as well, along with the rest of the companies.
Expert that you are, an expert in the alternative energy, how best can Nigeria optimize the potentials in green energy? Do you think renewable can offer the best solution to ending Nigeria's energy poverty?
So I think just like Nigeria leapfrog technology with the GSM revolution, I think the opportunity exists similarly in power. One solution which has been put forward, especially by Lagos State in recent times, is that of having like a distributed grid. As opposed to having a centralized grid, have a distributed grid with nodes where we have power generation at points closer to the end user. So this could be community power generation. One example of this are IPPs, but another example would be to have solar access points, probably on a street or community level solar access points. And I think if we invested in that, I think that could go a long way to providing more energy security for residential as well as commercial use, at least on the smaller commercial scale for users.
There's an increased interest in deployment of renewable facilities amongst MSME and industrial players. So how best can we upskill alternative penetration to address national energy deficit?
I think one thing that it's fairly easy for us to do is to look at what part of the solar value chain can we actually do in Nigeria. So cabling and wiring, I mean, these are things that Nigeria, we do have decent manufacturing for the cabling and wiring, and these are integral parts of the solar value chain. Aluminium for the frames of the solar arrays themselves. Again, this is not rocket science. It can be done here. The solar cells themselves, we can import the cells and make the arrays, so that will be more of an assembly. But there is no reason we should be, well, let me not say there's no reason we should be importing this. There's every reason we should also be making these. So I think it's a bit of both, because the government's knee-jerk reaction tends to be, oh, ban it. And then we find we don't have the capacity to make everything required. So let me not say ban it. Let me say is still let people import it, but double down on providing access to those things to be made here. Now, where we might need to provide a little more investment for education and training is in production of things like the inverters and the electrical components for these systems, the charge controllers and such. But even then, there are companies that are making them. There's a company that I went to see their facility. It's called PowerCube. They're a small company, but they are making these things here, and they're making them for the Nigerian market. They're integrating with GSM chips so that you can monitor them remotely and putting these things online. So it is doable. We can actually do the entire solar value chain here in Nigeria, but we need to make it advantageous for people to make that investment to do. We need to have the offtake there. When we make our solar arrays, are they as efficient as those that we would buy from abroad? And if they are, we need to be able to sell them into the local market. the government's MDAs and parastatals. There's no reason why in this day and age you should go to any local government or government office and it's in the dark. I mean, it just shouldn't exist anymore. So if we have local producers, the government should buy from them. Just like if you jump to similar topics with vehicles. Innocent has been in the market now for at least a decade. I see no reason why governments in Nigeria are still buying Toyota or whatever. Buy Nigerian, And this dovetails neatly into electric vehicles. We're seeing this trend everywhere, and Nigeria for now is still being left out.
I hope you've enjoyed the entire conversation we had with Otunba Akimbo Akin Olugbade. Join us again same time next week on the program Energy Day Timeline. Don't forget to subscribe and do well to follow us on our social media platforms. My name still remains Monique. Thank you for joining us.